I've been in law enforcement here for 30 years, and I've been the sheriff here for the past 8. We've been getting a lot of strange calls. Calls that I can't explain. They're calling us because there's something out there that scared them.
4-0 entering residence right now.
Do I believe in ghosts? I wouldn't say that I do.
Residence is clear.
But I think you have to look at these things when people you trust and you know are telling you they're afraid.
I've lived here for 50 of the 55 years of my life. Growing up, I knew this place was haunted. Butte has a history of mining, and that's what built this community. Wild West atmosphere, and with all the corruption and wealth that was here, there was a lot of tragedy. These days, we're working to get Butte into the future. Revitalizing our downtown and our uptown districts is the main focus for us here. But every time we put a shovel in the ground, something unsettling happens.
My department's getting overwhelmed with calls we just can't explain. The mayor and I are going to do everything we can to keep our city safe and our citizens safe. If that involves inviting paranormal experts to come here and spend some time in our community, I'm 100% with them.
Something big is happening. It's brewing underneath their city.
There's a monster that lives in the tunnels.
Can you talk to me through this flashlight? What would cause it to jump to 95.8? Look at it.
That glass just shattered. It is a spiritual awakening, and it is mad.
What the hell?
Our job now is to figure out how we can stop this before things get really bad for the town of Butte.
Are you trying to hurt anybody else out here?
What the dude?
I feel like I got stabbed in the gut.
We need an ambulance. I'm actually worried that we just made it worse.
Viewpoints, and beliefs presented on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the management, the affiliates and broadcast partners, or the sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
Scarefest Radio, the radio you can see.
And hello and welcome, everyone. It's Scarefest Television. The original broadcast date, June 14th, 2024. And my pause was, I'm looking at my camera. I'm like this floating head with hands. It's so cool against the green screen. Welcome, everybody. Dave Schrader is our guest tonight. Hello, Dave, and welcome back.
Thank you very much for having me. Always a pleasure to visit with you.
And, of course, if you don't know this, fans, Dave Schrader's a legendary paranormal podcaster and star of the Holzer Files and the Ghost of Devil's Perch. And tonight, Katie and Chad are handling the interview, which I fortuitously planned, knowing that I would be in the hayfield today and as tired as fuck. Or AF, as they say online, AF. Joe Lewis has a review of Godzilla -1, and we have 3 celebrity announcements tonight. So it'll be a good show, Tater. Chad, over to you.
Hey, welcome back. It's always a pleasure to see you and catch up.
Yeah, it's great to be here. And let me just say, Godzilla -1, no matter what language it's in, is a winner. Now you don't even have to do the review. We're good. Yeah. Let's keep going.
I was gonna say, we'll see if Joe agrees with you. I've often disagree with Joe, so we'll see how your opinion weighs in.
Well, one of us is wearing a Godzilla shirt, so I think they know what they're talking about.
Expert.
That's true.
Just saying, you know.
Dave, we talked about this a little last time you were here. Just I want to kind of recap a little bit for anybody who didn't tune in then. Can you again, Wes introduce you, legendary podcaster, radio host.
That's what I wrote for him to say, yeah.
One of the original paranormal radio and podcast host. So you kind of pioneered the industry. Can you talk a little bit about, one, how you got interested in the paranormal, and two, how that transitioned to the media side of the paranormal?
Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily pioneered it. I was just lucky to be one of the very first out there in 2006 when there was, I think, 3 or 4 other podcasts. There was Ghostly Talk. There was Jim Harold's Paranormal Podcast. There was Night Watch with Todd Sheets. Those were the main ones that were out when we broke, and we came out January 1st, 2006. I've just always had a life filled with paranormal experiences, growing up in a haunted house, seeing and experiencing weird things, being in the right place at the wrong time, or the wrong place at the right time, or the right place at the right time, however you want to look at this glass. And it's always been just an amazing life. I've been really lucky and blessed, and I've wanted to do radio since I was a child. Found radio at college, got in, and after doing 2 years and realizing there was no money in radio, I quickly quit and didn't go back into it until I was about 40 years old. And then I've been doing that now 18 years with Paranormal Talk Radio. So it's been a pleasure. And I got a chance to host my original show, Darkness Radio. Then I moved over to Coast to Coast AM as a fill-in host for 5 years. And 3 years ago, I stepped away from Darkness Radio and turned it over to my co-host and partner there, Tim Dennis, who continues on with that show. And I launched the Paranormal 60, which is live Mondays and Wednesdays on YouTube. And if you subscribe to our little podcast network, you can find it wherever you listen to podcasts. So I've got 2 shows on a week. Tuesday and Thursday is the audio shows. And then Monday, I've got Jeff Belanger with his podcast, New England Legends. Tuesday is my Paranormal 60. Wednesday, we have Tressa and Jenny with the Monsters Lounge. Thursday is the Paranormal 60 News. And Friday, we go all the way to Australia. And our friends Ann and Renata, who have a podcast called True Hauntings. And so that's our little paranormal slot that we have if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
And I certainly encourage anybody to out there who's interested in these sorts of subjects, tune in. It's going to be one of your best source for what's going on in the paranormal and encrypted universe. At some point, you transitioned over and started doing television. Can you talk a little bit about, I know you've been on multiple shows at this point. Can you talk a little bit about how you how that transition came about, and if that was originally a goal or just something you stumbled upon?
It wasn't a goal. I just wanted the radio. And when I'd get opportunities to be a guest on TV shows, I took it because that would only expose me to more people for my radio program. And the first show to step up was Paranormal State. I had been attending the UNIVCon Paranormal Conference with Ryan Buell and the whole gang from Paranormal State for quite a few years. And I'd been talking about this UFO ranch I visited and had really weird experiences with. And one day Ryan called me and said, "Hey, Uncle Dave, what do you think about doing a Paranormal State field trip where instead of looking for ghosts and demons, we go out UFO hunting and we go to that place?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's awesome. You're going to love it." And he goes, "I want you to come with." I said, "I'll be there." So I got to be involved in that episode. It's called First Contact. And I think you can find it on Max and Discovery Plus streaming services. So just look for Paranormal State. First Contact is the name of the episode. Pardon me, I'm fighting a bit of a cold here. Yeah, so that was my first foray into it. And then I became friends with the guys from Ghost Adventures. And I think it was around their second season, they invited me in, and we went to Rolling Hills Asylum in New York. And I've done about 12 episodes of Ghost Adventures, and then their 2 live Halloween specials. In 2011, Zach and I did a series, a little mini series called Paranormal Challenge. And we had a great time doing that show. And then, just kind of popping in and out on programs. And then I got the opportunity to step into the lead investigator role with the TV show, The Holzer Files. And we did 2 seasons, 23 episodes. And then after that, rolled into the Ghosts of Devil's Perch. And it's been a blast, man. Just, to be able to marry all of my loves and passions and get a chance to, travel the world, see historic sites, and interact with the strange and supernatural has been a dream come true.
Well, we're going to touch a little bit more on those as we go through the interview. Right now, I'm going to toss it over to Katie.
Well, it's really good to see you again. I've been having some internet issues, so I hope that does not affect this. So it's nice to see you again. You were at my panels last year. So I have to ask, what is your UFO story? I have a paranormal team, and I've always thought that if somebody called me and was like, I think I have UFOs and aliens, I wouldn't know what to do.
You go and you investigate. That's what we are. We're investigators, right?
Oh, that's true.
I saw a few things in the sky when I was a kid, and I went to Y camp. One night we all went out and laid out underneath the stars. There was a point in history, folks, when we didn't have cell phones and we actually looked up to the sky. I know it's hard to believe, but it happened. And we would just go lay out there under the stars and talk, and we saw weird lights moving in the sky. So that wasn't, that was interesting, but nothing earth shattering. And then one night in 2006, I was driving home late and I was listening to Coast AM, and I heard James Gilliland talking to George Norrie about his UFO ranch in Trout Lake, Washington. And what really caught me was at the end of the interview, he said, everybody's invited. And if you come on a clear night, you have a 90 to 95% chance of seeing UFO activity over my property. So not wanting to just be the guy behind the microphone and hearing stories, I wanted to experience it. So I actually didn't warn him, just showed up and went out there in October of 2006 and showed up on his property, and he was very congenial and nice to me, and we had weird experiences for the next 3 nights. And on the third night, when we were watching Mount Adams, the dormant volcano, and watching the skies above it, we'd seen weird things all week. I finally went out into the field and turned around and started watching the other direction. Where everybody else was watching this way, I was now turning around watching them in the sky above them. And as I did that, there was a grove of pine trees, and all of a sudden this thing came flying out, and it looked like a stingray, the way it swam through the air, but it was blue and it was glowing. It wasn't radiating light like a headlight. It was more like an incandescent blue. If you can imagine, like those blue gel packs you use as a freezer piece, it had that kind of weird blue color to it, and it just kind of glowed, and it swam through the skies and vanished behind another set of trees. So I ran like crazy towards this thing, my brain trying to process what I just saw. And to me, it looked like a bad 1980s music video effect. And I'm like, what am I seeing here? And I went running towards it, half thinking he's projecting something on a screen behind those trees. There was no screen. I was throwing rocks through those trees. Nothing hit, nothing bounced. And when I walked back over to James, he said, what did you see? And I told him, and he goes, yeah, that's a half biological craft. It's half living, half machine. And that's how it gets from our dimension into the other dimensions. That was the most powerful moment I'd ever had when it came to anything UFO.
I always tell people when it comes to ghosts that, like, you don't really have time to be scared because your brain's trying to process what happens. So I think that's how it would be like that.
To a degree. So, it was definitely unnerving, but like I said, my brain was trying to rationalize it away, and I didn't really feel fear. I was just more like, what am I looking at? And that's what made me charge towards it. And I've been to places where we've seen things in the sky and people run the opposite direction. I've always been the let's run to it and see what it is kind of guy. But, I've also got 11 kids, so I'm kind of hoping to get abducted.
Yeah. No, you can't get abducted before Scarefest, so don't go to any skylights.
How much better would it be if I get abducted and returned in time for Scarefest so I have even more stories to share?
Actually, yeah, that would be kind of sick. But be careful. We don't sign off on that. So
come on, Wes. I think Wes is all for it.
Yeah. Well, we might be.
Yeah.
It's actually time for our first break, so I'm going to hand it over to see what commercials we have.
The Bombs is a 2024 Scarefest weekend sponsoring vendor. The Bombs makes bath and body products for everyone. Ashley Dobbs makes unique small batch hand-painted bath bombs, plus sugar scrubs, whip soaps, and body oils. Find the Bombs on Facebook and at the monthly Central Kentucky Mystical Market in Lexington. Scarefest weekend sponsoring vendors make the event happen. Be sure to tell them that you heard it here on Scarefest TV.
Tuesday's Crypt features deals with talents in the horror community, from mask makers, sculptors, artists, and more. Plus, podcast Live in the Crypt, shooting the shiz with BK and the Swag, and BK and the Bees, Horror Buzz. Visit their website, join their Facebook group, and thank them for being a Scarefest sponsoring vendor.
Welcome back. We're here with Dave Schrader. Dave, we talked a lot about your podcasting, your radio career. I wanted to give you an opportunity to maybe tell us about some of the more interesting topics you've covered, things that have intrigued you as you've gone through this, or interesting guests. I'll just throw out one of my favorite shows you ever did was on the Flat Earth. They almost had me believing at the end of that episode. But I know you cover a lot of topics. Is there any topics or trends that really have stood out to you over this time?
Well, our show was one of the first to really break the Black-Eyed Kids stories and get them out there as a radio show. And we were doing that for probably 8 months to a year before everybody else started jumping on that bandwagon. So it was really cool to kind of be there when people started coming forward. And, you know, I liked that we were getting stories at that time because I felt like people were like, oh my God, I had this experience too. Now, 10 years on, I kind of question when I hear a story because I don't know if somebody's just trying to, become part of the history of the Black-Eyed Kids. Back in the day, it was exciting to hear these stories come out because it was so new and people were coming from different parts of the world and telling me these stories. I had former military that would tell me about these beings. We had a lot of really interesting deals. So Black-Eyed Kid phenomena is one of my favorites.
And I know you talked about that at one of your Scarefest appearances. So
yeah. And gosh, I don't know. I've had so many, I got to talk to Dan Aykroyd not once, but twice on my show. I had Dan Aykroyd on when his first documentary came out in 2006 called Dan Aykroyd Unplugged on UFOs. And we spent an hour talking, and we actually went commercial free for the entire hour just to give Dan Aykroyd our attention. And he was sitting at a campfire in Canada talking to us on the phone about his UFO experiences. And then years later, his father wrote a book about their family because they're actually paranormalists and investigators and parapsychologists. So his great-grandfather and grandfather had done all this. His father worked in the field. And when his great-grandfather, I believe it was, died, they had donated all of his work to college in Canada. So his dad was basically sharing this book and knowledge of all their experiences. So Dan Aykroyd and his father, Peter Aykroyd, came on the show. So that was pretty exciting. Great opportunity to talk to somebody I really respect and admire. And, what's great is one of the people that really inspired Dan Aykroyd was Dr. Hans Holzer. Our show, Darkness Radio, we were the last ones ever to interview Dr. Holzer before his passing. So we had that connection. And then I got to do the Holzer files and heard through a mutual friend of ours that Dan really liked the show. So it was nice to kind of get that feedback and know that at some point in history, the guy I grew up watching on TV was watching me on TV. So that was kind of a neat little, how do you do? So that, those were some of my favorites. I sat down with Judith Very Baker, who was the lover of Lee Harvey Oswald. And we discussed the JFK assassination, and she shed a new light on it for me. So I've had, just some remarkable opportunities to talk to celebrities, to investigate with celebrities, to, just your everyday average person that's had really extraordinary experiences. So it's hard for me to say, because he's Dan Aykroyd, it was more impressive because I've had more impressive stories, but it was just cool to talk to Dan Aykroyd and realize that there was so much more to it than just he liked the Ghostbusters, idea and came up with a movie. It was something that actually was part of his blood and DNA to, share those kind of paranormal stories.
I know as you've done your shows throughout the years, like you said, you were kind of there at the beginning of Black Eyed Kids. I know that you were kind of the first to start talking about Hat Man and the frog creature that that the report started coming out. I know that those are you've evolved with the paranormal fascination through the years. Are there any trends or anything you're seeing right now as you do these interviews that are kind of standing out as interesting theories or ideas?
It all goes in different cycles of, I think it's this. For a while, everybody believed everything was the djinn. That kind of faded. Now it's kind of more into imps and fae, like fairy world and realm. So there's ups and downs for all of it. But I that's what I love about this field, and I love about investigating it is you can't pigeonhole anything. Every time I think I start to really understand what's going on, a totally new door opens to me. And I want to be the guy that remains open. So I may believe this is what Bigfoot is, this is what a ghost is, this is what an alien is, but it doesn't mean I'm not willing to hear your story. And that may change my perspective of what it is I'm experiencing. And I've made some pretty radical changes in my thinking over 18 years of being vested in this.
Well, and I will say, I'm going to ask you a little bit more about your interview techniques and skills in a little while, but you're very good at, no matter what your opinion is, as long as your guest is respectful, you let them tell their story and listen to it, which is one of the things that draws me to the shows you do.
Thank you.
But I'm going to toss it back over to Katie now for a few minutes before our next break.
And if it will, just let me say one thing on that is I always found that showing respect to your guest, right? You're tuning in to hear about the paranormal, not just Dave's version of the paranormal. So I like the guests to shine, and I like the guests are great and allow me to push and prod and ask questions. And some of the best compliments I ever get are people saying, that's one of the best questions I've ever had. I've never been asked that in 18 years. Wow, that's a brilliant question. I really like that I find ways to make it even interesting for the guest who's told these stories 1,000 times.
Yeah, I was sitting here even thinking, I was like, oh, now I'm curious about your interview techniques. but okay, so I've started working at a library, and I, of course, am just all about books. So can you tell us about your books that you've written? Because you've written countless.
Well, I've only got 2 books out. One I co-wrote with Patrick Burns and Marley Gibson called The Other Side, a teen's guide to ghost hunting and the paranormal.
Yes.
And that's just a fun, easy read book that kind of goes over the basics. We wanted to make it easy and accessible. And it wasn't originally written for teens. It was written for everybody, but the publisher slapped teen on the cover at the last minute, I think, trying to cash in on the Twilight market. But, people like the book because it's a quick, easy read that gives you insights as to what ghosts are or could be, what the tools are that we're using in the field, how should we utilize a medium or psychic on an investigation, putting together teams, how to protect yourself, just kind of going over the basics without talking over your head. We try to simplify it and make it very good, because there were some books that were like 3 inches thick on how to ghost hunt. And I know nobody was going through reading all of that. So we came up with something that was a much easier read manual. Now, my new book just came out earlier this year, and it's called Theater of the Mind, Tales from the Darkness. And there's black-eyed kids and the bloody bones man, ghosts, aliens, monsters. So we've got a nice collection in there. And these are real experiences that I've collected over 18 years from listeners. And 2 of the stories are my own. I have one in there about a haunted doll and one about a haunted hospital. So those were 2 of my own tales. And then I've got a story in there about a changeling from, I believe, Ireland. I've got stories in there about near-death experience in hell, stories about aliens, craft, and other strange flying anomalies. So it's not just a campfire book of ghost stories. I really wanted to get something out there to people that would give you kind of an overarching view of the strange and anomalous world around us.
I think I need to request that one for our library to have. So where can I find those books?
If you go to my website at paranormal60.com, which is the name of my podcast, paranormal60.com, you can get signed copies of the book, and we have a package deal that you can get there, so you can get both books signed for one price. Or you can just go directly to amazon.com and you can order my new book, Theater of the Mind, there. Wherever you're watching or listening to this, just go there, look for Theater of the Mind by Dave Schrader. You can order it off of Amazon. They're not signed, but you'll get the copies there. And then the only thing I ask is, if you like the book and you've purchased the book, just take a few seconds to rate and review it on Amazon, because every time you rate and review a book for an author, it helps expose their book to more and more people.
Sure. What's been... you said the thing about the haunted doll, and I wanted to ask your opinion, because I don't know what mine is on haunted artifacts. Like, is there any... I mean, obviously is there any validity to it? Like, how can you tell that because you have a haunted object? Or...
Well, I mean, I've got a closet and a garage full of haunted dolls that have been gifted to me, and I've never once had anything try to kill me or shove my family down the stairs. I keep hoping, but it doesn't happen. Trying to live that Scarefest life, little Chuckies. But why wouldn't there be something? If you think about dolls in specific, and I talk about this fact that as a child you got that special bond with a toy, whether it's a doll or an action figure or a stuffed animal or your Ouija board, right? You pour a lot of energy into that, and maybe that's what you cuddle with when you're crying and you're sad, or that's what you sleep with every night, and you share your dreams into that. There's that element of these things being so a part of you, that almost like a tulpa, something that you give power to just by giving it life and talking to it as though it's real. Why wouldn't it be imbued with a little bit of who you are, or maybe those fractals of who you were? Some people have these dolls and they're nurtured and filled with love. And, I've got dolls that have been sent to me that cry, and, they're like, oh, it's terrifying. I go, why is it terrible? Well, it's crying. And I said, well, were you the original owner? No, we got it at this. I go, maybe it just misses its owner. Maybe it misses the kid it grew up with. Instead of jumping to the assumption that this thing is terrifying and wants to eat your soul, maybe, just maybe, show it some compassion and empathy. And, I'm always respectful to the items. I've not really had any problems. I've had a few mishaps, but usually we take care of it pretty quickly.
Okay, so this is just now how my brain is rolling. Do you think I have my stuffed animal here? If I put my energy into my stuffed animal and it became haunted, would that be me, or would it have its... Is it not?
It's kind of like that's a good question, because again, this is all theory. We don't know, but it's interesting. It's like people that say, you know what, my grandmother grew up in this home as a child and she loved it, and we see her ghost as a little child running around in this house, but she died at the age of 90, 500 miles away. And we see her old woman ghost walking around the house. And I'm like, well, that was the house she lived in for the majority of her life and raised her children and everything in. So that makes sense. A, why can't we visit both places? But B, maybe there's just those pieces, that happiness, that joy, that glee, that sadness, depression, anxiety, that you leave behind attached to these things. And it's interesting because it does seem like these fractals, which a lot of times we at one point considered residual hauntings, start to learn. So maybe you imbue part of yourself into that stuffed creature, and it's that little allspark that gives it life, if you will. And it just continues to evolve from there. So what it once was and what it is 20 years from now is something a little different. But you were maybe the spark that got it going. It's impossible to say, because I've heard different theories from mediums and psychics and sensitives, and I've also just been witness to how some of these things go and what happens. And I think it's more little pieces of who we are that are left with these items.
That makes sense. Well, it is now halfway through our hour, and I think me and Mike Keena are ready for our next commercial break.
Okay.
Are you a fan of horror movies, books, comics, music, and collectibles? Rumorg Magazine is for you. Subscribe today to receive 6 or 12 print issues annually and join me, Executive Editor Andrea Subisati, on an ongoing journey through the horror genre of the past, present, and future. Plus, get access to unmissable special editions such as A Century of Witches, 50 Years of Gore Cinema, British horror movies, and so much more. Rumorg, the world's premier horror and culture and entertainment magazine since 1997. Accept no substitute.
And our first celebrity announcement of the evening, Brad Greenquist. Brad Greenquist of Pet Sematary 1989 version, and Pet Sematary 2, and Copperhead, and The Bedroom Window, and a whole slew of other movies, part of our Pet Sematary reunion. Jonathan Breck's coming back for another trip. Jonathan Breck, been to Scarefest several times, fan favorite Jonathan Breck of the Jeepers Creepers franchise. Plus he was on Spy Kids, which I did not remember. Caroline Williams is our next announcement for the evening. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, Hatchet, Leprechaun 3, and that was Hatchet 3, by the way, and Megalodon the Frenzy. I have not seen that one yet. I didn't know there was another Megalodon movie out. Blood Feast, Blind, Stepfather 2, all kinds of our favorite movies. Caroline Williams is coming to Scarefest. Don't forget, if you are a film producer or you know of an independent film producer, tell them about the Scarefest Horror Film Festival. We're up to 74 entries as of today, and we've got to weed those down to fit into our weekend, but it is a long and rolling. We got some of the best coming to you all for Scarefest 2024. I want to thank Chad Harlan for sponsoring me in my next 5K run coming up June 29th at Coldstream Park in Lexington. I'll be running in the Eddie Benton Legacy 5K because that's what people who have heart attacks and smoked for 41 years do. Hey, my Sleepaway Camp cosplay was a hit at FrankenCon, and it will be coming back to Scarefest for an appearance. Yes, even with this shirt, because since I've ruined it, I'm going to wear it anyway. I'm stuck at 52 members on my Patreon, though. If you will subscribe, it's $1 a month, 25 cents a week. I will do that cosplay with a temporary tramp stamp. Great for your photo opportunities. You know you want a photo of me with the tramp stamp. You know it. Patreon.com/ScarefestRadio. Like I said, 25 cents a week. I need a Sarah McLachlan song playing in the background, but we don't have the rights to it. The Central Kentucky Mystical Market is coming up this weekend, June 15th and 16th. Central Kentucky Mystical Market, just a whole slew of special vendors, readers, craftsmen, all kinds of stuff. Check it out. CentralKYMysticalMarket.com, or just go to ScarefestWeekend.com and click the link there. Now, everyone, this is coming up in July, right? The Enchanted Forest Ball, presented by Mystical Luna. Join me. I will be there for a magical evening filled with enchantment and wonder. The event will take place at the Clarion Hotel Conference Center, where the ballroom will be transformed into a mystical forest setting. Get ready to dance the night away under twinkling lights and surrounded by lush greenery. Come dressed in your most whimsical attire. I have new tuxedo pants I have not even tried on yet, and I will be wearing those if they fit. But don't miss out on this. Hey, and it's adults only. No one under the age of 21 will be permitted because there is a cash bar, which is also a big draw for me. So, Enchanted Forest Ball. Go to ScarefestRadio.com if you can't find it online. We got a link right on the front page. Chad, over to you.
Dave, I just want to really briefly, and then we'll move on to another subject. Just go back to promoting your book. If you
what? Oh, if you insist, okay.
Everybody do check it out. I know the audio broadcasts, The Theater of Mind, were amazing, so I can't wait to get my copy and read the scripts behind it and the stories behind it. Mm-hmm. But talking about your discussions again, I think I told you this last time we were on the podcast here together. You are the best interviewer I've ever heard. And my day job, I actually do interviews, and I use techniques I listen to and hear from you in trying to improve my technique. So I was wondering if you had any tips, or if you could explain kind of how you developed that. Was it something you consciously did or were born with, or?
I've always had the gift of gab. So that was part of it. I'm also a horrible introvert, which, it's hard to believe when you see in person, because I'm very outgoing and everything, but you have no idea what a force that is to push through and be in public. I'm very introverted. So it was a great opportunity for me when I first started in radio, because it's just me and a microphone. We didn't have webcams. It was just two voices in the night talking. And I love that element of it. So I just grew with that. And then I was forced on stage the first time by Jason and Grant from Ghost Hunters, and started to come out of my shell a little bit with doing live events. But I always just find that, when I have a guest on, I want my guest to shine. I want to hear their story. Even if I don't believe a word they're saying, I do my best to not let on that I don't believe a word, because again, it's not my story to tell. And I've learned to reserve judgment. I mean, you tell me something insane, I'll be like, wow, that sounds absolutely crazy, Chad. Did were you drinking that night? Maybe a little puff. That might be the most I push on wondering where you're coming from. But it's about sharing those stories, because I found that a lot of times in sharing those stories that I didn't believe in, I get really beautiful, heartfelt emails and messages from people saying, thank you for talking to Chad about that, because I thought I was crazy. I had that same experience. And then I realized the world is still a lot bigger than I give it credit for. So I, just want the guest to shine. And I try not to, I know this is going to fly in the face of what most people do. I try not to learn too much about my guest or about the topic they're bringing. If I know that David Weatherly's got a new book on black-eyed kids, I already have a background working knowledge on black-eyed kids, but I don't know what the new stories are. I try to keep myself fresh that way, so that when I'm talking to my guest, I'm learning along with the audience. Because sometimes when you know each other too well, you have that inside talk. You might not ask the questions that the audience want to know. So I tried to just stay on the outside looking in with you. What if I was an audience member and he just said that? What would I want to know next? And I try to take it that next step. And that was, there's a couple of radio show hosts out there that were very famous that never did that. And it drove me crazy. They'd be like, so tell me about your Bigfoot encounter. Yeah, the Bigfoot came out of the woods, grabbed my hot dogs and buns and my bag of potato chips, and then started beating me with it, and then ran back in the woods. And then the host is like, so do you think UFOs are real? And I was like, wait a minute, let's go back. I need to know more about this Bigfoot story, right? So I try to always be like fluid during the interviews, to hear what they're saying, respond to the things that they've said, unless it's completely ludicrous or racially charged or something that I don't want to push any further. Those are the only times I'll step away. And thank God, out of 18 years, there's only been a few of those.
I'm sure that's translated to your investigation work too, hasn't it?
I guess so. I mean, partly it's like interviewing an unseen force, right? So I do a lot of EVP work, and I get really good response. But again, I try to show respect and love and empathy for the spirits, and that's when they do seem to come forward.
And talking to the people who've experienced, I mean, you, like I said, the techniques you use, you can really dig down into their story and find out their point of view, as opposed to jumping in any conclusions.
Well, I've also noticed that, doing interviews like this where there's a video component, they're fun, and it's more engaging to be able to look at you two and have a conversation back and forth. But I think there's also something to be said for that mask of anonymity, that if I was just talking to you over the phone, you may open up more because you're not looking me in the face. You're not feeling like I'm judging or watching for a, weird response from me. And you might just open up and be a little bit more forthcoming. And I found that, I think in my older interviews, there were times I really got gold out of people because they were comfortable, and it got to the feeling like it was just the two of us at home on our phones talking and nobody else was there. When you do this video, it's a gentle reminder we're not alone, right? There are people watching, maybe fives of people tuning in right now. You don't know.
If we're lucky. I'm going to toss it back over to Katie right now.
All right. So my big question that has nothing to do with the paranormal is,
okay,
do you like scary movies?
I do love scary movies. Yeah.
What's your favorite one?
The original Night of the Living Dead. I saw that in black and white on commercial TV. My dad woke me up late one Halloween night because our local channel in Chicago, WFLD, was airing a midnight showing of it. And I had school the next day, and my dad woke me up to watch the movie with him. And even with commercials, it scared the living shit out of me, right? So that stuck with me, and I have had nightmares about zombies my entire life, but I'm fascinated by that. I love zombie genre. And I had the great luck of meeting George Romero and having a great conversation with George about, movies and zombies in general. And one of the, here's a sad but very real truth about horror movies. And it was after the remake of Dawn of the Dead had come out. And George was in Chicago, and I drove to Chicago to see him. He was doing a special presentation on Night of the Living Dead. And I drove there, and there was this huge line to meet. And I'm like, God, I'm never going to get a chance to meet him. And I went outside because it was stuffy. I went outside before the movie, and he comes walking out by himself to have a smoke. So he just stood there chatting with me. And I said to him, I said, so George, what are we going to see first? A new George Romero zombie movie or a remake of Day of the Dead? And he just looked at me, and he took a long pull off his cigarette, and he goes, they already made the new Day of the Dead. And he goes, and this is what really pisses me off. They have now remade my three movies with bigger budgets than I'm asking to make a new movie. I say, I'd like to make a new, Dead movie, and they want to give me $5 million. And I'm like, no, I need like 18 million to make a good Dead movie. And they're like, no, we'll give you 5, but then they'll give 35 million to make a remake of one of his other movies. So it really got under his skin. Now, that was before Land of the Dead and, Diary of the Dead and some of the other stuff that he was able to do later on. But then the fan base is really weird, right? Because when you say George Romero, people love George Romero and they love his movies. And then he finally does a new Dead movie, Land of the Dead, and it fails miserably at the cinemas. Where are all those George Romero Night of the Living Dead fans? All the fans that couldn't get enough of Night of the Living Dead, Day of the Dead, and Dawn of the Dead didn't show up for his new movies. So that had to be just antagonizing and brutal for George. And my heart always went out to him. And when I bumped into him a few years after that, he just was very sullen about a lot of the things that had taken place. And I wish I had an answer for him. I think there's a lot of the classic horror movie directors out there that kind of have that same feel and sense that it's like they'll remake my stuff, or they'll make crappy versions that are obvious knockoffs and spend a lot more money on it, but they don't throw me a bone to get me a chance to create something or continue to build that universe.
That'd be so hard. That's the one movie that my sister, she's I would say she got me into horror movies. That she's like, that's the scariest thing. She's like, especially if you're younger when you see it, it is the scariest movie ever. So
yeah,
I've been too scared to watch it.
Now I love like the Conjuring movie. The first Conjuring I thought was one of the best psychological horror movies in a long time. And I know this is going to upset the Scarefest audience, but I'm not all about the hack and dash. I mean, I love Freddy and Jason and Michael like everybody else, but that's just gore porn, right? I mean, it's great stuff to watch and it's violent, but I love a good story that gets into your head and into your psyche. And there were a few times during that and Sinister where I remember kind of looking over my shoulders from time to time, and I'm like, "Whoa, this thing's really affecting me. It's getting into my brain." So I like when people take a step and make it a little, weirder. The first Nightmare on Elm Street movie, I also watched on a black and white TV because my buddy's parents were watching the color TV, and I'm that old that we still had black and white TVs. And we went and rented the movie because we didn't see it in theaters because we were too young. And then we popped it in, watched it on a black and white, like 12-inch TV, and scared the living pants off me. And I was like, wow, because again, it was great at getting in your head. And
Yeah,
who
the
hasn't
first
had
one,
those? Yeah, who hasn't had those
surreal.
nightmares? Yeah.
I love that. I always say surreal horror. I think it's time for our third break, but we'll come back to this after Joe's Bonehead Weekly.
Okay.
Treat Studios is a Scarefest weekend sponsoring vendor. Trick or Treat Studios is the one-stop shop for high-quality Halloween and horror. Shop masks, costumes, figures, collectibles, games, and more from your favorite movies. Find Trick or Treat Studios online at trickortreatstudios.com.
Joel of Robinson Hart is a Scarefest weekend sponsoring vendor. Joel Robinson has been the official Scarefest weekend artist since its beginning in 2008. Joel is a movie cover artist and a Universal Monsters artist. Visit Joel for posters, canvases, t-shirts, purses, and backpacks. Visit Joel's Etsy page at joelrobinsonart.com.
Hey, Scarefest fans, this is Joe Lewis of Bonehead Weekly coming back from you from that secret location, that I was in last week. Here to talk about a monster picture. A monster picture I wanted to see in the theater and just didn't get a chance to see. And today we're going to talk about Godzilla Minus One. Is it the best Godzilla movie ever made? No, I don't know. I have a lot of attachment to the original one, whether that be the actual Japanese version or the Americanized version where they added Raymond Burr to cut back and forth. I like them both for different reasons. Is it better than those? Is it the most heartfelt Godzilla movie ever made? Absolutely. So the thing is, for some of you all who haven't seen it, it just dropped on Netflix. For some of you, like I'm about to say, you're going to love it, but some of you I don't think are going to love it. So if you love those new Godzilla movies or King Kong X Godzilla, which I like them too, like I've talked about them on here before, my son loves them. If you love those movies and all you want to do is watch giant kaiju beat the shit out of each other and you really don't care about the human characters, this is not the movie for you in any way. This movie, Godzilla does show up in the first few minutes, but it is not the kind of Godzilla movie where that happens. Now they tried to do something similar with this with the first Godzilla movie that they made in America a few years ago out of this new creature, Legendary started with. Creature features with Aaron Johnson, blah, 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 whatever his name, Kick-Ass, and Bryan Cranston. Bryan Cranston's fantastic in that movie, but a lot of people complain, not enough Godzilla to the end. There's Godzilla throughout this one, but you are going to be pulling for the guy and the girl and the kid's going to break your heart. And some people are going to get a little bit emotional about this. This is a good emotional movie. It really is. I know we're talking about a Godzilla movie, but it's an emotional film. The only complaint I can throw at it is that acting in some scenes is a little over the top, but I don't know necessarily that that's me or if it's cultural, and I watched the dub version. Now, on Netflix, you can watch it dubbed in English, or you can watch the Japanese with English subtitles. I watched the dub version simply because need to get through it and things are going on, but you just get pulled into it because the movie's really not about Godzilla. It's about your kind of your main character and a redemption. It's a redemption story. I love redemption stories. I don't know why, but I do. And it's set during right after the Second World War. It's barely recovered. Japan's barely recovered. And of course, Godzilla shows up and starts to cause a ruckus. He's not a good guy like he is in the new movies. He's a bad, big old thunder lizard. And the movie just looks great. Monster, for the most part, looks great. They made him tubby, kind of, the way he walks. I kind of like it. It's really, they CGI'd kind of a throwback to what the original man in the suit kind of looks like and walks. I enjoyed it. I really like this movie. The two main characters are who you're going to be pulling for. There's some tragedy. Not everybody, just to let you know up front, gets out of it alive. And it's weird because you're just sitting there really invested into the human story because it's about a kamikaze pilot who's kind of a coward and can't complete his mission and thus is ostracized because kamikaze pilots aren't supposed to come back home from war. They're kamikaze pilots. They're not supposed to do that. So it's fascinating. It's a great story. And his journey and his arc of the main character. So should you watch Godzilla -1 on Netflix right now? Yes. Fantastic story. I can't believe they got that good of a story out of a Godzilla movie. Godzilla's been told so many times, but they got it out of it. I just loved all of it. Like I said, the only criticism I can throw at it, some of it's a little ham-handed as far as the acting. And is it, or is it the bad dub? It's not even a bad dub, but is it the dubbing and just doesn't work as well for American audience? I don't know. I loved Godzilla -1. I can't recommend it enough. So if you've got Netflix and you want to watch a monster movie with an actual heart where you're actually going to care about the people, check out Godzilla -1 on Netflix. This is Joe Lewis, Bonehead Weekly. I can't say enough. Godzilla -1. The hype's true. It's really it's pretty damn good. It's that good.
And welcome back, everybody, to Scarefest Television. Dave, did you approve of the Godzilla review?
I don't know if he knew what he was saying. He's like, oh, it's I'm missing something, but I loved it. But it wasn't what I was hoping, but it's better. But I didn't. So it was a very wishy-washy kind of Minnesota way of doing a movie review, if you ask me. No, I loved it. I thought it was a great movie, but he's right. It is a lot more about the people, but I thought that was what was so telling. This movie's made in Japan, and they're telling you we shouldn't have been in that war. We screwed up. And the challenges of the humanity, and then seeing what they unleashed with this creature, that's what built the drama and the dynamic between them. I thought it was a great flick for what it was. And when you consider, I think they made that movie for $10 million, and our average movies now are like 185 million, and it won an Academy Award for visual effects. That tells you something. So I loved it overall. Thought it was a great story. Great. I'd love to see where they're going to take this. And they opened it up with they left it with a way that leaves it open for another movie. And I think that could go crazy.
So I'm going to get Dave Schrader to start doing our movie reviews. That was so much more upbeat and fun. Okay. Yeah.
No, don't, Joe, you did a great job for a guy who doesn't know what he's talking about. Don't worry about it.
A couple things you said during the interviews, Dave. Yeah. Okay. I finally heard someone say we're moved away from residual hauntings.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. I've been cheering for that since I've been 16, 17 years since I got into the paranormal. So, is it actually getting a foothold, or is it just a new theory?
Well, it's, here's the deal. Residual, we as people want to pigeonhole everything. We have an intelligent, we have a residual, we've got a dream visitation. So it makes it easier if we can compartmentalize it. But the problem is that these things start spilling out of one compartment into others. They're not neatly tucked, and nobody could explain. But the residual, I think if I say that, most people think of a haunting like a residual, where at 3 a.m. every Halloween, the ghost of the old widow walks up the stairs with a lantern, and you'll see her in the window. So she stares out. And I've been to every one of those places that have that residual haunting on a specific date and time, and I've never once witnessed a thing. So I don't know, that maybe I'm just not tuned into it, Maybe it's more legend and lore than it is reality. But I think that it's because maybe these things aren't really residual in the fact of how we're seeing them. Imagine we're very close to other dimensions. We're right there. So the fact is that you're watching the same thing happen. It doesn't mean that it's just in a loop playing over. It just so happens you're seeing through a veil of a moment in time that's very real to that person. I think a lot of our hauntings are us haunting ourselves. I went to Waverly Hills Sanatorium one night. I'm investigating. I got two guys on either side of me. We walk around a corner. A nurse walks around, stops, and looks at us. Eyes get huge. She turns and runs in the other direction. Why is a ghost afraid of us? Well, they're not. But this place has been haunted for years, and the employees used to talk about seeing strange things. What if those strange things were us 30, 40, 50 years later investigating that location? Because we're sharing the same space, we're sharing the same energy, but once in a while we shift and we can see through that veil. It's like a page in a book where if you look at the pages, they're clean, they're white, but if you get it wet, all of a sudden you can start to see the letters from the other side of the page starting to bleed through, and you get glimpses of what's to come. And I think that maybe that's, an energetic pattern or something opens up, solar flares, geomagnetic energy anomalies, and it just for a moment allows you to see through it. Kind of like those, when you're driving on a hot road and you see what looks like you're going to drive up into a lake. You just see the waves and the watery look, and then you get up there and there's never anything there. Maybe there is. Maybe you're looking through to when this was a magma field and dinosaurs roamed the earth and you just saw it. Or it's just a visual reflection from the heat coming off the road. But there's no saying that with that heat creating that visual template that we're not also seeing something there, right? It's like the movies that they project on sheets of water. If you shoot a movie, it'll just go until it hits something. You give a sheet of water, which is transparent, thin, but it'll hit that sheet of water and play on it. I think maybe there's an element towards hauntings that's what we're seeing is we're just getting the right visual perspective to be able to see that moment happen. And it was very real and living for them. And it may be them in that moment looking through and seeing us. And, they then think they're haunted. We think we're haunted, and we're just feeding the same beast.
That makes total sense, because then like everybody, the whole the stereotype of the ghost said get out. I mean, what if they think we're a ghost and they're telling us to get out? Like
right. Well, and I think another element to that is, and I actually talk about this in my book. I'm not kidding you, Theater of the Mind, but the story I talk about my haunted hospital, I wondered, why would ghosts stay in hospitals and asylums and old prisons? That would be the last place I'd want to live my afterlife. But again, let's go with theology. Let's say we die and our energy goes somewhere, heaven or hell. Whatever's left behind is the pettiness, the rage, jealousy. It's territorial. It's the base animal instinct. And it stays because this is all it knows. And there's other energy like that it can combine with. And that's why we get very rudimentary communication, bangs, lights flickering, and get out, right? Get away. It's like a dog, get off my yard, right? So you're getting those fractals of the personality, and until they fade away and weaken, you're going to get those little pieces of these puzzles that have been left behind by what we once were.
Neat.
Here, no, you have a hit and tell me what you think.
That blew my mind.
Well, we're at the end of the hour, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the show tonight. Dave, it was fun sitting here listening to you. And of course, me being the bullshit the host I am, I'm sitting here making notes saying, God, I wish I was there doing it to that set. Good damn. But anyway, so I got a couple in.
Well, thank you.
But looking forward to seeing you in October. Stick around through the credits, because I do have a question to ask you off the air. And everybody, we'll see you next week.